The courtroom fell into a silence so heavy it felt like it could crush bone. Officer Silas Graves shifted in his seat, his smirk fading for the first time all morning. He and his partner, Brody Higgins, had walked into the tribunal expecting a slap on the wrist, another administrative leave vacation. They had friends in high places. They knew the system because they broke it every day. But then the bailiff announced the presiding judge. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the black robe didn't conceal the man walking toward the bench. It was the man they had beaten, humiliated, and handcuffed in the rain 6 months ago. The man whose life they tried to ruin for sport. Judge Agnes Amanda didn't look at the files. He looked directly at Silas. And in that cold, dead stare, Officer Graves realized his life was over. The storm over Oakhaven County had been brewing for days, but when it finally broke, it unleashed a torrent that turned the gutters of Highland Park into rushing rivers. It was a neighborhood of wrought iron gates, manicured ivy, and silence, the kind of silence money bought to keep the chaos of the city at bay. Agnes Amanda loved that silence. It was why he had purchased the corner estate on Wisteria Lane 3 years ago. At 45, Agnes was a man of disciplined habits. He woke at 4:00 a.m., ran 5 miles, reviewed case law for 2 hours, and then, on Sundays, he worked on his pride and joy, a 1967 Shelby GT500. That Sunday evening, the Shelby had stalled just outside his own driveway. The alternator had given up the ghost. Agnes, dressed in a grease-stained grey hoodie and old sweatpants, was leaning under the hood, shielding the engine from the sudden downpour with his body. He was soaked to the bone, his hands black with oil, wrestling with a rusted bolt. He didn't hear the cruiser roll up. The new electric engines of the precinct's patrol cars were silent predators. The first thing he noticed was the blinding white spotlight cutting through the rain, pinning him against the glossy black fender of his car. "Step away from the vehicle, now!" The voice was amplified, distorted by a loudspeaker, but the aggression was crystal clear. Agnes froze. He slowly raised his hands, the wrench still in his right grip. He knew the drill. He knew the statistics. He knew that in this lighting, a wrench looked like a weapon, and a black man in a hoodie looked like a target. "Drop the weapon. Drop it." Agnes slowly lowered the wrench to the pavement. Clang. 2 doors slammed. Footsteps splashed heavily through the puddles. Agnes turned slowly, squinting into the glare. 2 officers. One was tall, gaunt, with a buzz cut that looked severe. Officer Silas Graves. The other was younger, thicker around the neck, with a face that looked permanently flushed. Officer Brody Higgins. "Hands on the hood! Spread 'em!" Graves barked, his hand resting on his holster. "Officers," Agnes said, his voice calm, the deep baritone that usually commanded a courtroom now fighting to be heard over the rain. "I live here. This is my vehicle. It stalled in front of my gate." "I said hands on the hood, boy." Higgins shoved Agnes forward. The impact of his chest against the Shelby rattled the hood. Agnes complied, spreading his legs. "If you check the registration, you'll see it belongs to Agnes Amanda. My ID is in my back pocket. I am reaching for—" "Don't you move!" Graves jammed the barrel of his service weapon into Agnes's kidney. "You think we're stupid? We've had reports of car break-ins in this area all week. You fit the description." "The description?" Agnes asked, cheek pressed against the wet metal. A man fixing his own car in his own driveway. A suspect in dark clothing lurking in a high-value residential zone. Graves corrected with a sneer. He kicked Agnes's ankles apart, harder than necessary. Pain shot up Agnes's leg, but he didn't flinch. He had learned stoicism in law school and mastered it on the bench. "Check the ID," Agnes repeated. "My wallet. Right pocket. Higgins fished the wallet out. He flipped it open, glancing at the driver's license. Agnes Amanda. Address matches. Graves frowned, looking disappointed. He holstered his weapon but didn't step back. Doesn't mean anything. Could have stolen the wallet from the homeowner inside. Where's the keys? In the ignition, Agnes said. Officer, I am a federal. Shut up, Graves snapped. You talk when I tell you to talk. Graves grabbed Agnes by the back of the hoodie and yanked him upright, spinning him around. The officer's eyes were cold, filled with a familiar mixture of boredom and malice. You got an attitude, Agnes. I don't like suspects with attitudes. Smells like weed on you, too. Agnes's eyes narrowed. I don't smoke, and you know that's a lie. Are you calling me a liar? Graves stepped into Agnes's personal space, the brim of his cap dripping rain onto Agnes's forehead. Brody, you smell weed? Higgins snickered. Strong odor of marijuana, Silas. Probable cause. Turn around, Graves commanded. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and suspicion of possession. This is a mistake, Agnes said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. A very expensive mistake. The only mistake, Graves whispered as he slapped the cuffs on Agnes's wrists, tightening them until the metal bit into the skin. Was you thinking you belonged in a neighborhood like this? They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. Agnes watched through the cage as his Shelby, his prize, was left abandoned in the rain, window down, hood up. He closed his eyes and began to memorize their badge numbers. Graves, 49-222. Higgins, 58-19. The holding cell at the 4th precinct smelled of stale urine and industrial bleach. It was a smell Agnes hadn't experienced from this side of the bars in 20 years. He sat on the metal bench, his wet clothes clinging to his skin, shivering slightly. He had been processed like common cargo, fingerprinted, mugshot taken. Graves had made a point of shoving Agnes's head against the height chart, laughing with Higgins about how hard they fall. They had stripped him of his belt and shoelaces. They had ignored his request for a phone call for 3 hours. Agnes sat with perfect posture, eyes closed, meditating. He wasn't praying. He was building a case. He was cataloguing every procedural error, every civil rights violation, every sneer. Around 2:00 a.m., the heavy metal door to the cell block buzzed open. Amanda, you made bail, or something. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking man named Miller, looked confused. He unlocked the cell door. Agnes stood up, his knees stiff. He walked out, his expression unreadable. In the lobby, the atmosphere was different. The air was thick with tension. Standing at the front desk was not a bail bondsman, but a woman in a sharp navy blazer. It was Sarah Jenkins, the district attorney of Oakhaven County. Beside her stood Captain O'Malley, the precinct commander. O'Malley looked pale. He looked like a man who had just swallowed a grenade. When Agnes walked into the light of the lobby, Captain O'Malley actually flinched. "Judge Amanda," Sarah Jenkins said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. She rushed over to him. "My God, Agnes, I am so sorry. I didn't get the call until 10 minutes ago." Agnes looked at the captain. "Captain O'Malley." "Judge?" O'Malley croaked. There seems to have been a massive misunderstanding. My officers, the paperwork said Agnes Amanda. But they didn't. The system didn't flag the judicial status immediately because of the middle name discrepancy. "They profiled me, Captain," Agnes said calmly. "They fabricated probable cause. They claimed they smelled marijuana on a man who has never smoked a day in his life. They used excessive force. I will handle it personally, Judge. I'll have their badges on my desk by morning," O'Malley promised, wiping sweat from his forehead. Agnes raised a hand. "No, The room went silent. Sarah looked at him, confused. "No. If you fire them now," Agnes said softly, "the union will fight it. They'll get reinstated in 6 months with back pay. They'll say it was a heat-of-the-moment error. They'll say I was aggressive. It becomes a he said, she said." "Then what do you want to do?" Sarah asked. Agnes looked through the glass partition toward the back of the station, where Graves and Higgins were likely drinking coffee, laughing about the suspect they brought in. "Let them go," Agnes said. "Drop the charges against me, obviously. But don't fire them. Not yet. Officers like that, they don't stop. They get comfortable. They get arrogant. And sooner or later, they make a mistake that you can't sweep under the rug. A mistake that leaves a paper trail so wide, even the union can't cross it." "You want to wait?" O'Malley asked, bewildered. "I want justice, Captain, not a slap on the wrist," Agnes said. "Delete the arrest record. Make it disappear. As far as Officers Graves and Higgins know, I was just some guy with a good lawyer who got cut loose. Let them think they won. Let them think they are untouchable." Agnes walked toward the exit, his shoelaces still in his hand. He paused at the door and looked back. "Because when they finally fall," Agnes said, his eyes cold, "I want to be the one to catch them." 6 months passed. For Officers Graves and Higgins, they were the best 6 months of their careers. They felt invincible. The incident with the guy in the hoodie, Amanda, had vanished. No internal affairs investigation, no lawsuit. It reinforced everything Graves believed, that he ran the streets, and nobody could touch him. They grew bolder. They started skimming cash from drug busts, taxing the local dealers. They stopped writing reports for use of force. They became the kings of the night shift in District 4. But they didn't know they were being watched. Agnes Amanda had gone back to work. He presided over contract disputes, grand thefts, and felonies. He was fair, but severe. He was known in the courthouse as the Hammer. But every evening, he met with Sarah Jenkins. "We have them," Sarah said, one Tuesday evening in Agnes's chambers. She laid a thick file on his mahogany desk. "The wiretaps?" Agnes asked, leaning back in his leather chair. "Crystal clear," Sarah nodded. "Extortion, evidence tampering, filing false reports, and assault." She sighed. "They put a kid in the ICU last night, a tourist. Beat him bad because he didn't speak English fast enough." Agnes's jaw tightened. "Is the kid okay?" "He'll live, but he'll limp for the rest of his life." Sarah tapped the file. "We have the indictment ready. Racketeering, aggravated assault, conspiracy to violate civil rights. It's a RICO case, Agnes. We're taking down their whole little crew." "Good. There is one problem," Sarah said, biting her lip. "The defense attorney they hired? It's Tobias Vane, the shark." Agnes nodded. Vane was expensive and dirty. He knew how to manipulate the docket. "Vane is already filing motions," Sarah explained. "He's trying to get the case assigned to Judge Halloway. You know Halloway loves cops. If Halloway gets this, they walk with probation." Agnes stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. The rain was falling again, just like that night 6 months ago. "Halloway is retiring next week," Agnes said quietly. "He's clearing his docket. He's not taking new major trials." "Then who goes into the rotation?" Sarah asked. Agnes turned around. A small, grim smile played on his lips. "The wheel spins, Sarah. It's random assignment. Unless the Chief Justice designates it a special interest case due to the public nature of police corruption," Agnes said. "In which case, it goes to the senior judge with the highest clearance for sensitive matters." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's you." "File the indictment," Agnes said. And Sarah, don't put my name on the docket until the morning of the arraignment. Let them think they're walking into a friendly room. The morning of the arraignment was bright and cold. The Oakhaven County Courthouse was buzzing. The arrest of 2 veteran officers for racketeering was headline news. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as Graves and Higgins were led in. They weren't in handcuffs. Professional courtesy. They wore expensive suits, flanked by Tobias Vane, who was smiling like he'd already won. Inside courtroom 4B, the gallery was packed. Families of victims, curious lawyers, and half the police force were there. Some cops were there to support their brothers. Others were there hoping to see the rot cut out. Graves leaned over to Higgins. "Relax, Brody. Vane says we got Holloway's backup. Judge Pendergast. He's old, tired, and hates the DA. We'll be out of here by lunch." Higgins nodded, chewing gum nervously. "I just want this over, Si." "It's over before it started," Graves scoffed. "We own this town." "All rise!" The bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the chatter. The door behind the bench opened. Graves stood up, buttoning his jacket, putting on his respectful face. He expected the hunchbacked figure of Judge Pendergast. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man swept into the room. The black robe billowed around him. He moved with a terrifying grace. He ascended the steps to the bench, placed a single file folder down, and remained standing. He looked out over the courtroom. Graves squinted. The judge looked familiar. The strong jawline, the intense eyes, the shaved head. Where had he seen him? Maybe a charity gala? Then, the judge looked down, directly at the defense table. The judge's eyes locked onto Silas Graves. It was a look of absolute, crushing recognition. Graves felt a cold drop of sweat roll down his spine. The memory hit him like a physical blow. The rain, the hoodie, the classic car, the man on his knees. "I'm a federal—" "Oh no," Graves whispered. "What?" Higgins whispered back. "That's him!" Graves hissed, his face draining of color. "Who?" "The guy," Graves choked out. "The guy with the Shelby, the one we kicked." Higgins looked up, squinting. His mouth fell open. The gum fell out onto the table. Judge Agnes Amanda sat down slowly. He picked up the gavel. It looked like a toy in his large hand. Bang! The sound was like a gunshot. Department of Justice versus Silas Graves and Brody Higgins. Agnes's voice filled the room, amplified by the microphone. The same deep baritone Graves had told to shut up 6 months ago. "Case number 49982. I am Judge Amanda presiding." Tobias Vane, the defense attorney, sensed the shift in the air immediately. He stood up. "Your Honor, we were expecting Judge Pendergast." "Judge Pendergast has the flu," Agnes said, not breaking eye contact with Graves. "You have me. Are the defendants ready to enter a plea?" Vane cleared his throat. "Your Honor, before we proceed, my clients feel there may be a conflict of interest." Agnes leaned forward. The courtroom held its breath. "A conflict, Mr. Vane? I have never presided over a case involving these officers before. I have no financial ties to them. I have no familial relation. On what grounds do you allege a conflict?" Vane looked at his clients. Graves was shaking his head frantically, mouthing, "Don't say it, don't say it." If they admitted they knew him, they would have to admit why they knew him. They would have to admit to the illegal arrest, the profiling, the assault, crimes that weren't even on the current indictment. If they brought it up, they handed the prosecution more ammunition. They were trapped. I will confer with my clients, Your Honor," Vane stammered. "You do that," Agnes said coldly. "But let me be clear. In my courtroom, we follow the law to the letter. We respect the process, and we respect the truth. If your clients are innocent, they have nothing to fear. But if they have abused the power entrusted to them by the people—" Agnes paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "Then God help them." The trial of Officers Graves and Higgins became the most watched event in Oakhaven history. For 3 weeks, the prosecution dismantled the blue wall of silence, brick by brick. Sarah Jenkins was ruthless. She paraded a line of victims to the stand: shop owners who had been shaken down for protection money, teenagers who had been planted with evidence, and the tourist whose leg Graves had shattered. But the defense attorney, Tobias Vane, was earning his paycheck. He was a master of deflection. He attacked the victim's character, bringing up old parking tickets and school suspensions to paint them as unreliable criminals. He was creating doubt. The jury looked conflicted. Graves sat at the defense table, his confidence slowly returning. He even winked at a reporter in the front row. Then came the wiretaps. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls Detective Miller to the stand to authenticate Evidence Exhibit C-19, Sarah announced. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. The audio was grainy, recorded from a bug planted in their patrol car, but the voices were unmistakable. "Easy money, Si. That kid didn't even know what hit him." Higgins's voice. "He'll learn. You break a few bones, they learn respect. Besides, who's going to believe a junkie over a decorated officer? We are the law, Brody. We write the narrative." Graves's voice. The jury box went cold. Graves stared at the table, his jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. Tobias Vane stood up, desperate. "Objection! Context! This is locker room talk, stress relief. It proves nothing." "Overruled," Judge Agnes Amanda said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "The jury will weigh the evidence." Vane realized he was losing. He decided to play his last, dirtiest card. He had done his digging. He knew about the night in the rain, not officially, but he had heard the whispers from the precinct gossip. He decided to bait the judge. If he could provoke Agnes into an angry outburst, he could call for a mistrial based on judicial bias. "Your Honor," Vane said smoothly, walking toward the bench. "My client, Officer Graves, feels that this court holds a personal vendetta against him, specifically regarding an incident involving a classic car, a Shelby, perhaps." The courtroom went dead silent. Graves held his breath. This was it. If Agnes reacted emotionally, if he admitted he was the victim, Vane could scream, "conflict of interest," and get the whole case thrown out. Agnes looked down at Vane. He didn't blink, he didn't flush. He slowly removed his reading glasses and folded them. "Mr. Vane," Agnes said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "are you introducing evidence of a prior interaction? Because if you are opening the door for the prosecution to add charges of false arrest, filing a false police report, and civil rights violations to your client's current indictment." Vane froze. Agnes leaned forward. "If you wish to discuss that night on the record, I am happy to recuse myself after I sign the warrant for those new charges. Is that your strategy, counselor? Do you want to double your client's potential sentence right now?" Vane looked at Graves. Graves looked sick. He frantically shook his head. "No." "I withdraw the comment, Your Honor," Vane stammered, stepping back. "Wise choice," Agnes said, putting his glasses back on. "Proceed." The trap had snapped shut. Agnes had used their own fear against them. They couldn't expose his bias without exposing their own crimes. They were forced to be judged by the very man they had tormented. By the morning of the 14th day, the atmosphere inside courtroom 4B had shifted from a legal proceeding to a slow-motion execution. The air was thick, recycled, and smelled faintly of floor wax and fear. For Officer Silas Graves, the trial had begun as an annoyance, a bureaucratic hurdle he had to jump over before getting back to the streets. He had walked in on day one with a smirk, winking at the rookie cops in the back row, confident that the blue wall would hold. But as the days ground on, that wall hadn't just cracked, it had been pulverized. The prosecution, led by the relentless District Attorney Sarah Jenkins, hadn't just presented a case. She had told a horror story. And the villains of that story were sitting at the defense table. The final blow to the defense's arrogance came just before closing arguments. The prosecution rested their case, but the echo of the wiretap's evidence played the day before still hung in the room like a toxic fog. The jury couldn't unhear the sound of Graves laughing while a teenager begged for his inhaler. They couldn't unsee the photos of the bruises on the shopkeeper's face. Tobias Vane, the high-priced defense attorney, looked like a man trying to bail out the Titanic with a teaspoon. He leaned over to Graves, his voice a harsh whisper. "We need to put you on the stand, Silas. It's a Hail Mary. If the jury sees you as a human, maybe, just maybe, we get a hung jury on the racketeering charge." Graves adjusted his tie, his hands trembling slightly for the first time. "I can do it. I can charm them. I've testified 1,000 times." "No," a voice croaked from the other side of the table. Graves turned. It was Brody Higgins. The younger officer looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark, bruised circles. He was sweating, a cold, clammy sheen that made him look physically ill. "You're not going up there, Silas," Higgins hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and sudden, volatile rage. "You open your mouth, you'll perjure yourself in 5 minutes, and you'll take me down with you." "Shut up, Brody," Graves snapped, his eyes flashing with his old menace. "I'm saving us, because you've been sitting here crying like a baby since arraignment." "I'm done," Higgins whispered. He looked at the jury, then at the judge. Judge Amanda, who sat atop the bench like a stone gargoyle, unmoving, unblinking. "I'm not going to prison for you." Higgins grabbed a notepad and scribbled furiously. He ripped the page out and shoved it toward Vane. "Give this to the DA. Now." Vane read the note. His face went pale. "Brody, are you sure? This is suicide. It's survival." Higgins spat. The note was a proffer, an offer to flip. Higgins was offering to testify that Graves was the ringleader, that Graves had orchestrated the evidence planting, and that Graves had kept a ledger of their illegal taxes in a safe deposit box the police hadn't found yet. Vane, bound by ethics, but seeing a sinking ship, signaled the bailiff. The note was walked over to the prosecution table. Sarah Jenkins picked it up. She read it. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply looked at the defense table, her eyes landing on Higgins, who was practically vibrating with anxiety. She stood up and walked to the sidebar, motioning for Vane. Judge Amanda leaned in. "Your Honor," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying just enough for the front row to hear the tone, if not the words. "Defendant Higgins is offering a full allocution in exchange for a plea to lesser charges. He wants immunity on the racketeering count." Agnes Amanda looked at Higgins. He saw a man who wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry he had been caught. He saw a rat trying to escape a trap he had helped build. Agnes's face remained impassive. "Ms. Jenkins, does the Commonwealth need Mr. Higgins's testimony to secure a conviction against Mr. Graves?" Sarah looked back at the mountain of evidence on her desk. The wiretaps, the bank records, the 34 victim statements. "No, Your Honor," Sarah said firmly. "We do not." "Then the court sees no reason to entertain a plea at the 11th hour," Agnes said, his voice cold and final. "The time for conscience was 6 months ago, Mr. Vane. The trial proceeds." Vane walked back to the table and shook his head. Higgins let out a small, strangled sound, like a dying animal. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. Graves stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight a vein bulged in his temple. He was alone. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Usually, a quick verdict was bad news for the defense. Vane knew it. He started packing his briefcase before the jury even entered the room. "All rise," the bailiff called out. The 12 jurors filed in. They walked with their heads down. Not a single one of them looked at the defense table. In the legal world, that was the sign. It was the look of death. If a jury is acquitting you, they look you in the eye to reassure you. If they are convicting you, they look at the floor, the judge, the wall, anywhere but at the man whose life they are about to end. "Be seated," Judge Amanda commanded. The room was silent. The air conditioning vent rattled, a sound that seemed deafening in the quiet. Graves felt his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat that made him nauseous. "Madam Foreperson," Agnes said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" A middle-aged woman in a floral dress stood up. She held a verdict sheet with shaking hands. "We have, Your Honor." "Publish the verdict." She cleared her throat. In the case of the Commonwealth versus Silas Graves and Brody Higgins, on count 1, racketeering in the 1st degree. She paused. Graves stopped breathing. "We find the defendants guilty." The word hit the room like a physical blow. A sob erupted from the back of the gallery. Higgins's mother. Graves didn't move. He stared at the empty space in front of him, his mind unable to process the word. On count 2, conspiracy to commit extortion. Guilty. On count 3, aggravated assault. Guilty. On count 4, falsifying official records. Guilty. It went on and on. 12 counts, 12 guilty verdicts. Each one was a hammer blow, driving them deeper into the ground. Higgins was weeping openly now, his shoulders shaking, snot running down his face onto the expensive suit he would never wear again. Graves sat frozen, a statue of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the law. He was the predator, not the prey. "Members of the jury," Agnes said, "the court thanks you for your service. You are excused." As the jury filed out, the reality of the room shifted instantly. The air of a trial, of presumed innocence, evaporated. Now it was just a room with 2 criminals. Tobias Vane stood up, his voice lacking any conviction. "Your Honor, we request that the defendants be continued on their current bail status pending sentencing. They are former officers, they have strong ties to the community, and they are not a flight risk. They need time to get their affairs in order." Agnes slowly closed the file in front of him. He clasped his hands and looked directly at Silas Graves. For the first time all day, there was a spark of emotion in the judge's eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was satisfaction. "Mr. Vane," Agnes said, "your clients have just been convicted of a violent racketeering enterprise. They are facing a mandatory minimum of 20 years. The presumption of innocence is gone. The incentive to flee is overwhelming." Agnes turned his gaze to the 2 bailiffs standing by the wall. They were big men, veterans of the court who had seen Graves and Higgins strut around the precinct for years. They didn't look sympathetic. "Bail is revoked immediately," Agnes ordered. "Take them into custody." "Wait!" Graves shouted, the word bursting out of him involuntarily. He stood up, knocking his chair over. "You can't do this. I need to see my wife. You can't just take me." "Sit down, Mr. Graves," Vane hissed, grabbing his arm. "No." Graves pulled away, panic seizing him. "This is a mistake. I'm Officer Silas Graves. You can't put me in a cage." Agnes didn't raise his voice. He didn't bang his gavel. He simply watched. The two bailiffs moved in. They didn't use the polite, gentle touch reserved for white-collar criminals. One of them grabbed Graves's wrist and twisted it behind his back with practiced efficiency, a move Graves had used on 100 suspects. "Stop resisting," the bailiff barked. The irony hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharper, louder, and more final than any gavel strike. Graves gasped as the cold steel bit into his skin. He looked down at his wrists. He had put these on so many people. He had laughed as he tightened them. Now he felt the weight of them dragging his arms down, dragging his soul down. Higgins didn't fight. He held his hands out, his head hanging low, surrendering to the inevitable. "Judge, please," Vane pleaded one last time. "The county jail is dangerous for them. We request protective custody in a separate wing." Agnes looked at the two men in cuffs. He thought about the holding cell where he had sat for 6 hours, shivering in wet clothes, while these two men laughed and drank coffee 20 feet away. "The sheriff will handle housing assignments based on standard protocol," Agnes said dismissively. "If they are concerned about their safety, I suggest they follow the rules. That is, after all, what they always told the people they arrested." Agnes stood up. "Sentencing is set for 2 weeks from today. Get them out of my sight." The bailiffs shoved Graves and Higgins forward. Graves stumbled, his balance thrown off by the restraints. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes locking with Judge Amanda's. In that moment, Graves didn't see a judge. He saw the man in the hoodie. He saw the ghost of his own prejudice standing on the high ground, looking down. The heavy oak door swung open, revealing the dark corridor that led to the cells. The sounds of the courtroom, the weeping mother, the whispering reporters, the shuffling papers, faded away. As the door clicked shut behind them, Silas Graves realized the terrifying truth. The badge was gone. The gun was gone. The power was gone. He was just another inmate now, and the nightmare was only just beginning. The day of the sentencing, the sky over Oak Haven was a bruised purple, heavy with unfallen rain. Inside the courthouse, the air conditioning system hummed a low, monotonous drone that did little to cool the stifling atmosphere of courtroom 4B. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a wake. The gallery was packed, shoulder to shoulder. There were no empty seats. Reporters sat on the floor in the aisles, their laptops glowing in the dim light. In the front rows sat the victims, a silent army of the broken and the bruised. The shopkeeper with the tremor in his hands. The teenager who now walked with a permanent limp. The mother whose son had been planted with evidence and lost his scholarship. They sat with a quiet, terrifying patience, waiting to see if the system would finally work for them. At the defense table, the transformation of Silas Graves and Brody Higgins was complete. Gone were the tailored Italian suits and the arrogant smirks. Gone was the swagger of men who carried badges like licenses to kill. They wore county-issued orange jumpsuits that hung loosely on their frames. Graves looked hollowed out. 2 weeks in administrative segregation had stripped him of his veneer. His head was bowed, his skin pasty and grey under the harsh fluorescent lights. He wouldn't look at the gallery. He stared at a scratch in the mahogany table, his leg bouncing in a rapid, uncontrollable rhythm. Beside him, Higgins was catatonic, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant, looking like a child who had woken up in a nightmare he couldn't escape. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs like a guillotine blade. The shuffle of feet was deafening as 300 people stood in unison. Judge Agnes Amanda emerged from his chambers. He moved with a glacial slowness today. He didn't look at the papers in his hand. He didn't look at the stenographer. He walked up the steps to the high bench and stood there for a long moment, looking out over the sea of faces. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone carved by years of interpreting the law. He sat. The sound of his robe settling was the only noise in the room. "Be seated," Agnes commanded. The crowd sat. The tension was so thick it tasted metallic. "We are here for the sentencing in the matter of the People versus Silas Graves and Brody Higgins," Agnes began, his baritone voice filling every corner of the room without the need for a microphone. "The jury has found the defendants guilty on all counts: racketeering, extortion, aggravated assault, conspiracy to violate civil rights." He turned his gaze to the defense table. "Mr. Vane," Agnes said, addressing the defense attorney, "you may speak on behalf of your clients." Tobias Vane stood up. He looked exhausted. He smoothed his tie, trying to summon the ghost of his usual charisma, but he knew he was fighting a losing battle. His only goal now was damage control, to save these men from a death sentence by another name. "Your Honor," Vane began, his voice rasping slightly, "we are not here to contest the verdict. The jury has spoken. We are here to ask for mercy." Vane walked toward the bench, gesturing back at the two broken men in orange. Silas Graves and Brody Higgins gave 15 years of their lives to this city. They worked the night shifts, the holidays, the riots. They were in the trenches. Yes, they lost their way. Yes, they made terrible, inexcusable mistakes. But they are not monsters, Your Honor. They are men who broke under the pressure of a job that asks too much. Graves looked up then, a flicker of desperate hope igniting in his eyes. He nodded slightly, clinging to his lawyer's words like a lifeline. "They have families," Vane continued, pressing his advantage. "Children who need fathers. We are asking for the minimum mandatory sentence, and crucially, we are requesting that the court recommends they serve their time in the federal low-security facility in Allenwood. Sending former police officers to a maximum security state prison would be, well, Your Honor, it would be a death sentence. And this court is about justice, not vengeance." Vane sat down, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Agnes said nothing for a long time. He picked up a pen, turned it over in his fingers, and then set it down. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Graves stopped breathing. "Mr. Vane speaks of mercy," Agnes said finally, his voice soft, almost conversational. "He speaks of the pressure of the job. He speaks of mistakes." Agnes opened the thick file in front of him. "I have the pre-sentencing report here. I have read the letters from the community. Mr. Vane, you call these mistakes. But a mistake is forgetting to file a report. A mistake is running a red light." Agnes looked up, and his eyes were sudden fire. "Breaking a tourist's femur because he didn't understand English is not a mistake. That is malice. Planting narcotics in a teenager's backpack to meet a quota is not a mistake. That is predation. Systematically extorting local businesses under the threat of violence is not the act of a stressed public servant. It is the act of a gangster." Graves flinched as if he had been slapped. "The defendants will rise," Agnes ordered. Graves and Higgins scrambled to their feet, the chains around their waists clinking softly. "Silas Graves," Agnes said, focusing solely on the taller man, "do you have anything to say before I pass sentence?" Graves cleared his throat. His voice was a dry croak. "Your Honor, I just want to say I'm sorry. I got carried away. I let the power get to my head. But I'm a good cop. I was a good cop. I just want to go home to my wife." "You want to go home?" Agnes repeated flatly. "You feel you belong at home?" "Yes, sir," Graves whispered. Agnes leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the desk. He stared deeply into Graves's eyes, searching for something. "Do you remember the night of November 14th?" Agnes asked. Graves frowned, confused by the specific date. I don't recall, Your Honor. Let me refresh your memory, Agnes said. It was a Sunday. Heavy rain. A residential neighborhood in Highland Park. A report of a suspicious person. Graves's brow furrowed. He was trying to process the information, but the stress was clouding his mind. There was a man, Agnes continued, his voice dropping to a hush that forced everyone in the room to lean in. He was fixing his car, a classic 1967 Shelby GT500. He was wearing a grey hoodie because he didn't want to ruin his clothes. He was minding his own business in his own driveway. In the gallery, a pin drop could have been heard. On the defense table, Tobias Vane froze. You and Officer Higgins pulled up, Agnes narrated, his eyes never leaving Graves. You didn't ask questions. You blinded him with a spotlight. You screamed at him. You shoved him onto the hood of his own car. You kicked his legs apart until he bruised. Graves's mouth opened slightly. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like the blood had simply evaporated. The memory came rushing back. The rain, the oil on the hands, the arrogance. He told you his name, Agnes said. He told you his ID was in his pocket. He told you he lived there, but you didn't listen. You told him. Agnes paused, tilting his head. Do you remember what you told him, Mr. Graves? Graves began to shake, a violent, visible tremor. No, he gasped. No, it can't be. You told him he had an attitude, Agnes said, his voice rising, thundering now. You told him he didn't belong in that neighborhood. You told him that people like him were always guilty of something. Agnes stood up. He loomed over the bench, a towering figure of retribution. I am the man in the hoodie, Mr. Graves. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries of shock, and a sudden roar of murmurs filled the air. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his weapon, shouting for order. But nobody was listening. Graves stumbled back, his legs hitting the chair behind him. He looked at the judge, really looked at him, and saw the face of the man he had humiliated in the rain. I am the man you arrested for resisting. When I was standing still, Agnes shouted over the noise. I am the man whose civil rights you violated because you didn't like the way I looked. And I am the man who decided not to fire you that night. Agnes slammed the gavel down. Bang! Order! Order in this court! The room fell into a stunned silence. I let you go, Agnes said, his voice trembling with controlled rage. I let you walk away that night because I knew that if I fired you then, you would just get your job back. The union would protect you. You would learn nothing. I waited. I watched. I let you feel safe. I let you think you were untouchable. And just as I predicted, your arrogance grew. You gave me exactly what I needed to ensure you would never, ever wear a badge again. Graves was weeping now. Honest, terrified tears. Please, Judge, I didn't know. If I had known it was you— That is exactly the point, Agnes roared. If you had known I was a judge, you would have treated me with respect. You only treat people with dignity if you think they have power. But if they are poor or weak or just wearing the wrong clothes, you treat them like garbage. That is why you are dangerous. That is why you are here. Agnes picked up the sentencing sheet. Silas Graves, for the crimes you have committed against the people of this county, and for the betrayal of the oath you swore, I sentence you to the maximum penalty allowed by law. 20 years for racketeering, Agnes read. 10 years for aggravated assault. 5 years for conspiracy. Graves looked at his lawyer, pleading. Vane just shook his head, defeated. These sentences are to run consecutively, Agnes declared, for a total of 35 years. 35 years, Graves screamed, his voice cracking. My life is over. You ended lives, Mr. Graves. You stole futures. Now the bill has come due. Agnes looked at the paperwork regarding the prison assignment. He picked up his pen. As for your request for federal low-security housing. Agnes paused. He looked at Graves with cold, hard eyes. Denied. Your Honor, please, Vane shouted. You can't send them to state. They are cops. They were cops, Agnes corrected. Now they are convicts, and in the eyes of the law they are no different than the men they put away. Agnes signed the order. The scratching of the pen was loud in the silence. You are remanded to the custody of the Department of Corrections to serve your sentence at Blackwood State Penitentiary. General population. The wail that came out of Brody Higgins was inhuman. Blackwood was a fortress of concrete and steel, a place known for its brutality, a place where former officers had a life expectancy measured in days, not years. No, Graves shouted, struggling as the bailiffs moved in. You can't do this. It's a death sentence. You're killing us. Agnes watched them with detached finality. The bailiffs grabbed Graves by the arms, hauling him back. The chains rattled violently. Officer Graves, Agnes called out one last time. The bailiffs paused. Graves looked back, tears streaming down his face, terror in his eyes. You once told me to learn my place, Agnes said, his voice calm, final, and absolute. Now, you are going to yours. Agnes brought the gavel down with a final, earth-shattering crack. Court is adjourned. As the heavy oak doors swallowed the screaming men, dragging them down toward the transport vans that would take them to hell, Agnes Amanda stood alone on the bench. He took a deep breath, exhaling the tension of 6 months. He adjusted his robe, gathered his files, and walked out. The rain outside had stopped. The storm was over. As the bailiffs dragged a screaming Silas Graves and a weeping Brody Higgins out the side door, Agnes remained on the bench. He watched them disappear into the holding cell that would lead to the transport bus, and then to the iron gates of Blackwood. He felt the heavy weight in his chest finally loosen. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. It was balance. The scales had tipped, and he had righted them. That evening the rain returned to Oakhaven. It fell in sheets, washing the city streets clean. Agnes Amanda pulled into his driveway. The lights of his house were warm and inviting. He parked his daily driver and walked over to the garage. He hit the switch, and the fluorescent lights hummed to life, illuminating the 1967 Shelby GT500. It was fully restored now. The chrome shined like a mirror. The engine was tuned to perfection. He didn't need to work on it tonight. He just wanted to look at it. He pulled the grey hoodie off the hook on the wall, the same one he had worn that night. He put it on. He sat on the hood of the car, listening to the rain drum against the garage roof. Somewhere, miles away, in a cold, concrete cell, Silas Graves was learning what it felt like to be powerless. He was learning what it felt like to be a number. He was learning the lesson he had refused to learn on the street. Agnes closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and motor oil. It smelled like freedom. He had faced the darkness, and he hadn't blinked. The system was broken, flawed, and often cruel, but today, just for today, it had worked. Agnes patted the hood of the Shelby, stood up, and turned off the lights. Case closed, he whispered into the darkness. Wow, 35 years. That is what I call ultimate karma. From bullying an innocent man in the rain to begging for mercy in his courtroom, Officer Graves finally found out that you can't judge a book by its cover, and you certainly can't judge a man by his hoodie. What do you guys think? Was 35 years enough, or was sending them to Blackwood Prison too harsh? Personally, I think they got exactly what they gave out. Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new drama every single week. Thanks for watching. And remember, be careful who you step on, because they might just be the one holding the gavel tomorrow. See you in the next video.